The porch light at the Kellerman's place had been on for 3 days straight. Not their front light, the one on the timer, the upstairs window, the bedroom one, the kind that stays on when somebody forgets to turn it off because they left in a hurry, or the kind that stays on when there's nobody left to turn it off at all. I noticed it the morning this all started. Tuesday, early, maybe 5:30. I was standing at my own kitchen window with a cup of coffee I hadn't actually touched yet, just holding it the way you hold something warm when the rest of the world doesn't feel that way. The Kellermans were a quiet couple, mid-50s maybe. He drove a silver Subaru. She grew tomatoes in raised beds along the fence line. They waved when you waved. That was the extent of it. 4 years living 30 feet apart, and I knew their car but not their first names. Their bedroom light was on, and their car was gone. I told myself it meant nothing. I told myself that for about another 6 hours. My name is Ray Cutler. I'm 44 years old. I do commercial electrical work, wiring for office builds, retail spaces, the occasional school or hospital wing. I'm not a dramatic person. I don't catastrophize. My wife Meg would tell you I'm the opposite actually. That I have a tendency to wait too long before I call something a problem. That I sat on a transmission issue for 4 months once because I kept saying it'll work itself out. It did not work itself out. So when I tell you that by Tuesday afternoon I was already moving things from the basement to the truck, I want you to understand what that means coming from me. Something had shifted in the air outside, not the weather, something underneath the weather. The news had been bad for a week, not apocalypse level bad, not yet. The kind of bad that still has press conferences and graphics and experts in blazers talking about containment protocols. The kind of bad that feels managed from a distance. The kind of bad that lets you believe that whatever's happening is happening to someone else in some other city in some other zip code. But the Kellerman's light was on, and their car was gone. And 3 houses down the Abernathy dog had been barking since Monday, and it wasn't barking anymore. The silence where that dog used to be felt like a missing tooth in your mouth. You keep running your tongue over the spot. My daughter Nora was 9. She was in the living room watching something on her tablet with her knees up on the couch cushions and her sneakers still on the way she knew she wasn't supposed to. And she looked so completely ordinary that looking at her made my chest hurt. My son Marcus was 14. He was upstairs in his room doing whatever 14-year-olds do behind a closed door that they don't want explained to you. Probably gaming. Probably talking to his friends through the headset in that way where he spoke in half sentences and made sounds of offense at things happening on a screen. My wife Meg was at the kitchen table with her laptop and her reading glasses and a legal pad covered in her handwriting. She's a nurse practitioner. She'd been glued to the clinical updates since Friday, cross-referencing CDC bulletins with hospital reports her colleagues were sharing through their private networks, the kind of information that wasn't making it onto the news yet. She looked up when I came in with the second load from the basement. How bad? I asked. She took her glasses off, and that was the answer. Meg doesn't take her glasses off unless she's about to say something she's been sitting with for a while. The transmission reports are wrong, she said. The incubation window they're publishing, it's not matching what the floor nurses are seeing. It's moving faster than they're saying, and it's not staying in the outbreak zones. I set the box down on the floor. She looked at the box and then at me. You're already packing, she said. Yeah. She didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at the legal pad, like she was doing arithmetic. My mother, she said finally, she lives 300 miles east in a town called Delwood. Nothing there but a feed co-op and a church and 2,000 people and enough distance from any major population center that it might as well be the moon. Which is exactly why I'd been thinking about it since Saturday. Call her. I said. She already did. That morning apparently. Her mother Shirley was 71 and sharp as glass and she'd told Meg to stop watching the news and start driving. Good advice, as it turned out. I drove past Mercy General that evening on my way back from the gas station. I wasn't planning to stop. I just happened to take that route because the main roads were already backing up and I was cutting through the hospital district. The parking lot stopped me. Not full. Not chaotic. Something worse than either of those things. Mostly empty. Mercy General is a 700-bed hospital. It has 400 staff on a slow day. That parking lot should have been packed at 8 p.m. on a Tuesday. It should have been loud and lit and moving with the constant turnover of a place that never stops. 3 ambulances sat at the bay and none of them were running. A handful of cars scattered through the lot like something had emptied it in a hurry. One entrance door was propped open with what looked like a chair. No people. I pulled in because I didn't know why I pulled in. The way you slow down at an accident even when you're telling yourself not to look. I sat in the lot for maybe 2 minutes with the engine running and the windows up and watched that propped open door. Nothing came out. Nothing went in. I drove home. Meg was feeding Nora dinner when I got back. Normal dinner. Pasta. Garlic bread. The kind of thing that smells like a regular Tuesday evening in a house where everything is fine. Nora was telling Meg about a video she'd watched of a dog that had learned to open the refrigerator. Marcus came down for food and ate standing at the counter, which Meg usually said something about. That night she didn't. I waited until both kids were away from the table before I told her about the hospital. She listened without interrupting, which she doesn't always do. Then she said, "We leave tomorrow morning. Early." I said, "We leave tonight." She looked at me, the garlic bread still warm on the stove. Nora's half-finished glass of juice on the table. "How early is tonight?" she asked. 2 hours. I said, "Pack for a week but plan for longer." She pulled out her phone and called her mother. Shirley picked up on the first ring, which meant she'd been sitting with the phone already. "We're coming tonight," Meg said. Shirley said, "I know." I made up the beds. 1 hour and 40 minutes. That's how long it actually took from the moment I said 2 hours to the moment I pulled the truck out of the driveway. We have a 2019 Ford F-150. It's my work truck mostly. A crew cab, which means 4 doors and enough back seat that both kids can fit without their knees in each other's faces. I'd rather have taken our Camry for the mileage, but the truck felt right in the way that things feel right when you stop thinking about efficiency and start thinking about what you'd want around you if things went sideways. I put the camping gear in the bed, the 2-man tent and the 4-man tent we'd bought when we thought we were going to do more camping and then never did, the camp stove and the 2 propane canisters, the sleeping bags still in their stuff sacks from the last time, which was 3 summers ago. Food from the pantry. I did this fast and without a system, which meant we ended up with 3 cans of chickpeas and no can opener. A fact I discovered 40 miles down the road and chose not to share with anyone. Water. 6 gallons in jugs plus every bottle we had in the house. First aid kit from the hall closet. Meg's medical bag. She'd packed this herself and I didn't ask what was in it, but it was heavy and she'd been methodical about it. 1 bag of clothes each. I told the kids 1 bag. Nora packed stuffed animals and 2 pairs of socks. Marcus packed his gaming headset and no undershirts. Things I discovered later. The dog. We have a dog, a 5-year-old beagle mix named Biscuit with a loud bark and a personality built entirely around food and inconvenience. I put him in the back seat with Nora and he sat in her lap for approximately 45 seconds before wedging himself into the footwell and refusing to move. I did not tell the neighbors we were leaving. I wanted to, the couple next door on the other side from the Kellermans, the Pattersons. Tom and Diane Patterson. Tom was 70 and had bad knees and Diane had fibromyalgia and they had a daughter in Seattle they never heard from enough. I stood at the end of their walkway in the dark for about 30 seconds thinking about knocking. I didn't. That decision still lives in me like a splinter, not because I think it would have changed anything for them, but because I didn't even give them the chance to decide for themselves. I just walked back to the truck. Meg was already in the passenger seat with her laptop bag on her knees and her phone in her hand. She'd been texting her colleagues all evening. The responses had gotten shorter as the night went on, and then they'd stopped coming. She didn't look at me when I got in. She just said, "Go." So I went. The first 15 miles were almost normal. Highway on-ramp, merge, speed up, settle into the lane, the ordinary hypnosis of nighttime driving where the road is just a river of yellow dashes and you stop thinking about where you're going and just go. Marcus had his headphones on in the back seat, his face lit from below by his phone screen, the dead-eyed teenager glow I'd spent a year trying to regulate. That night I was grateful for it, grateful for anything that kept him occupied and not asking questions I didn't have answers to. Nora had fallen asleep by the time we hit the on-ramp. She does this, drops instantly like a power cut. 1 minute she's asking if Biscuit can have a snack and the next she's out, mouth open, head against the window. Biscuit was asleep in the footwell, snoring at a volume that was honestly impressive for an animal that size. Meg had the radio on low, cycling through stations the way you do when you're not really listening but you need the sound. Most of them were running the emergency broadcast loop. The automated voice with the neutral inflection that doesn't actually tell you anything. Shelter in place, monitor local authorities, avoid unnecessary travel. Avoid unnecessary travel. On a highway at midnight with my family in the truck. Right. One station was still live, a man's voice, tired, talking about reports coming in from the Eastern Corridor. He used words like disturbance and situation and developing. The kind of language that means I'm not allowed to say what I actually know yet. Meg turned it off. The traffic was thin but not empty, which was the part that bothered me, because at midnight on a Tuesday the highway should have been nearly dead. Instead there were vehicles. Not rush hour volume but a steady irregular stream of headlights going the same direction we were going. East. A lot of people making the same quiet calculation in the dark. I passed a minivan doing 50 in the fast lane. The back was so packed I couldn't see through the rear window. A sedan with a mattress tied to the roof badly, the rope visibly sagging in the middle. A pickup truck with 3 people in the bed sitting with their backs against the cab and their faces turned away from the wind. Nobody was going west. I mentioned this to Meg. She looked at the westbound lanes for a moment. 2 cars, widely spaced, both going fast. Yeah, she said. That was the whole conversation. Around the 90-minute mark Nora woke up and said she needed the bathroom and I pulled off at a gas station that was still lit. Still had power. Still had a functioning restroom which felt like a small miracle. The clerk behind the counter was a kid, maybe 19, with the look of someone who'd been told to stay at his post and was starting to regret agreeing to that. You should go home. I told him. Just go. He looked at me and then looked at the empty parking lot outside and then back at me. My manager said to stay until 6. Your manager's not coming at 6. I said. I don't know if that was true. I said it because it felt true. And because looking at this kid I felt the same thing I felt standing at the Pattersons' walkway. The need to at least give someone the information and let them decide. He was still standing there behind the register when we pulled out. I watched him in the mirror until the station's lights disappeared behind the tree line. 2 hours out from home. Somewhere in the middle of a stretch of state highway between one small town and another. Meg said, Ray, slow down. Not loud, not urgent. That very specific tone she uses when she's processing something and needs more time. I slowed. She was looking at the shoulder. A car had drifted off the road into the shallow grass median, not crashed, not crumpled, just rolled gently sideways like it had coasted there and stopped. The driver's door was open, the interior light was on, and someone was sitting in the driver's seat. Just sitting. Not moving. I pulled over without thinking about it and stopped about 50 yards back. The figure in the car was upright, head up, but nothing about the posture was right. It was too still, the absolute stillness of something that is not doing anything at all, not sleeping, not resting, not waiting. Just stopped. Meg said, Don't get out. I wasn't going to. I sat there with the engine running and the hazards on watching this figure in the car. Marcus had leaned forward between the front seats. What's wrong with them? He asked. I don't know. I said. Is it? His voice dropped. Is it one of those? I didn't answer him because I didn't know and because Nora was awake now too, looking at the car with her blanket pulled up to her chin. Daddy. We're okay. I said. Put your blanket back up. The figure in the car turned its head. Not toward us. Just rotated, slowly, like it had registered a sound we couldn't hear. I pulled back onto the highway. I kept the speed at 70 for the next 20 miles. Nobody talked. Meg had her hand on the dash like she was bracing for something. She kept it there for a long time. It wasn't the last one we saw like that, but it was the first, and the first one always stays the clearest. The way your mind takes a picture of the moment before it learns to go numb. We pressed on into the dark, east toward Delwood, toward Shirley's house and her made-up beds and whatever safety a town at the end of a 2-lane road could actually offer. The truck's tank was at 3/4. The clock on the dash said 1:47 a.m. And somewhere ahead of us in the black, 260 miles of road we hadn't driven yet were waiting to show us exactly how wrong things had already gotten. Meg called her mother somewhere around the 2.5-hour mark. Not because we'd planned to, but because the silence in the truck had gotten heavy enough that doing something felt better than doing nothing. The call connected on the third try. Shirley picked up immediately, which meant she hadn't been sleeping either. "We're past the state line," Meg told her. "Maybe 2 hours out still." There was a pause on Shirley's end, the kind of pause that has weather in it. "The Donahues left this afternoon," Shirley said. "The whole family packed up and went north toward the lake cabins. Randy Donahue told Walt Ferris they weren't coming back until things settled." Walt Ferris was Shirley's neighbor, a retired postal worker who kept chickens and knew everybody's business within 4 miles. "Are there many people leaving Delwood?" Meg asked. "Some," Shirley said. "Not most. Most people here think it's a city problem. You know how people think out here." I knew how people thought out there, and I wasn't sure they were wrong. "Tell her about the road," I said. Meg looked at me. "Tell her to check the road in," I said. "The county road that comes off the state route. See if it's clear." Meg relayed this. We heard Shirley set the phone down. Footsteps, a door, then nothing for about 90 seconds. Marcus had fallen asleep finally, his head against the window at an angle that was going to hurt his neck in the morning and that I didn't fix because sleep was more important than neck angles right now. Nora was awake again. She'd been awake since the stopped car. She wasn't asking questions, which was somehow more unsettling than if she had been. She just sat with Biscuit in her lap and her blanket around her shoulders and watched the road over my headrest. Shirley came back. "Walt's light is on," she said. "I can see it from the porch. I'll have him drive out and check the road in the morning. We'll be there before morning," Meg said. "Oh," Shirley said. "Then I'll put the coffee on." That was Shirley. $80 grocery runs when grandkids visited, handwritten birthday cards in the mail. Put the coffee on in the middle of whatever this was becoming. Meg hung up and looked out her window for a long time. "She looks smaller on the phone," Meg said. "She sounds smaller than she used to." "She's fine," I said. "I know," Meg said, "but she sounds smaller." I didn't say anything else. I just drove. The highway stretched ahead empty and the sky above it was genuinely dark, the way skies only get when you're far enough from city lights, and the stars out here were obscene. More stars than you ever remember stars being. And in another context, looking at that sky would have been the thing you pulled over for. The thing you woke up the kids for. Look at that. We didn't pull over. The gas gauge was at half when I saw the lights. A truck stop off the highway. Big one. The kind with diesel lanes and a diner and a covered lot for 18-wheelers. It was lit up, which meant power, which meant the pumps might be running, and getting to 3/4 on the tank before we needed to felt like a margin worth having. I pulled in. The diesel lot had maybe 8 trucks in it. More than I'd have expected at 3 in the morning, but not the full house a place like this would normally carry. The diner windows were lit, but I couldn't see anyone moving inside. I pulled up to a pump and got out. The air had a smell to it, not the diesel and coffee smell of a normal truck stop. Something underneath that, flat and slightly sweet, the way air smells near standing water in summer. I noticed it and filed it away. The pump worked, card reader and everything. I filled the tank and topped off a 5-gallon can I kept in the bed, and when I turned around there was a man standing about 10 feet behind me. Big guy, trucker type, flannel shirt, work boots. He had his hands in his jacket pockets and he was just standing there looking at me with an expression I couldn't read in the sodium light. My whole body went tight. "Just getting gas," I said. "Just passing through." He nodded slowly. "Where you headed?" "East. Family in Delwood." He looked at the truck, at the silhouette of Meg in the passenger seat and Nora's face visible in the back window. "Keep off the interstate past exit 47, he said. "There's a pileup. Been there since yesterday afternoon. Nobody's clearing it." I thanked him. He nodded again and turned and walked back toward the diner. Slow, unhurried, not the walk of someone who was afraid of anything. I got back in the truck. "Who was that?" Meg asked. "A guy." "What did he want?" "Nothing. He was just telling me about a road problem." She looked at the diner. The man had gone inside and she watched the lit windows for a moment. How did he know we were headed east? She asked. I thought about that. Lucky guess, I said. She didn't respond, and we pulled out of the truck stop and back onto the highway, and I took us off at exit 43. 4 exits before the one the man mentioned, just to be safe. You're paranoid, Meg said. Yeah, I said. She didn't tell me to get back on the interstate. The back roads were a different world. Not worse exactly, just quieter in a way that had texture to it. The kind of quiet you could feel pressing against the windows. 2-lane county roads through flat farmland, the occasional cluster of grain elevators against the skyline, the reflective eyes of deer at the field edges standing and watching us pass, small towns every 15 or 20 miles, dark except for the odd-lit window, shut up tight, the lights on inside telling you someone was in there but not telling you why they weren't answering the door. We passed through one town where every traffic light was still cycling, green, yellow, red, for nobody, the intersection empty and the signals doing their patient mechanical job anyway. Something about that was deeply wrong in a way I didn't want to look at directly. Marcus woke up around 4. He didn't say anything for a while, just looked out the window, getting oriented, remembering where we were and why. Then he said, Dad, is this like the zombie thing? I didn't answer right away. The word hung in the truck cab for a moment. None of us had said it yet. The news hadn't said it. The press conferences hadn't said it. But Marcus was 14 and he'd grown up on a diet of survival games and horror films, and he had pattern recognition the same way I did about electrical systems. He could see when a structure wasn't sound. I don't know what it is yet, I told him. What I know is we're driving away from it and toward Grandma Shirley's. He was quiet for a moment. The car we stopped at, he said, the person sitting in it. I know. Was that one of them? I don't know. He nodded, absorbing this with that particular teenage combination of genuine fear and determined calm, trying to be the older one in the back seat because Nora was right there. Is there anything I can do? He asked. Yeah, I said. Keep checking my mirrors and tell me if something's behind us that I should know about. He repositioned himself so he could see both the driver's side and the passenger side mirrors. He watched them for the next 40 miles without being asked again. Meg reached back at one point and squeezed his knee. He didn't pull away like he normally would, just let her. Nora said, Marcus, do you want half my granola bar? He took it, thanks Nor. For people in a truck in the dark on a road that used to be an ordinary road, and the ordinary things they were doing for each other were the truest things happening in the world right then. We came down the county road into Delwood as the sky was going from black to dark blue, that pre-dawn color that isn't really light yet but is the memory of light coming back. Population 2,000 on a good census year. The kind of town where the dollar store and the grain co-op are the 2 biggest buildings and the church parking lot is the social calendar. The road in was clear, no barricades, no abandoned cars, just road, and the town looked asleep in the way towns are supposed to look asleep at 5 in the morning. Not evacuated, not emptied, just resting. Shirley's house was on the east side of town, a white 2-story with a wraparound porch and a garden that had been going since before Meg was born. I turned onto her street and immediately saw Walt Ferris. He was sitting on his own porch across the road in a lawn chair, not the relaxed posture of someone who'd nodded off out there. The upright posture of someone who had been intentionally awake. He had a rifle across his knees. Walt was 68 years old, retired, the kind of man who built things with his hands and knew the name of every species of bird in the county and ran the church rummage sale with a terrifying level of organizational precision. He was also apparently the person who had decided without being asked that sitting on his porch with a rifle in the dark was the right call. He was correct. I rolled down my window as we pulled up. Ray, he said, like it was any morning. Walt, I said, quiet night. Mostly, he said. Couple hours ago something came through the Hendersons' yard. He nodded toward a house 3 down on the right. Moving wrong. I watched it from here. It went through the yard and into the field behind and I haven't seen it since. Moving wrong. I said. Yeah. Walt said. You'll know what I mean when you see it. Shirley's front light was on and her door opened before we even got out of the truck. She came down the porch steps in her robe and her slippers, and Meg went to her, and they stood in the yard holding each other while the rest of us got out slowly and stretched and breathed the cool morning air. Nora ran straight to Shirley, and Shirley scooped her up even though Nora was technically too old to be scooped. Shirley was not a person who acknowledged children being too old to be scooped. Marcus stood by the truck and looked at Walt across the road. Walt lifted his chin at him. Marcus lifted his chin back. I got the bags from the bed and carried them inside, and Shirley's house smelled like coffee and like every visit we'd ever made here, and for about 90 seconds standing in her hallway with 2 duffel bags and a dog sniffing the baseboards, I felt something in my chest unclench that had been clenching since I packed the basement. 90 seconds. Then Meg called me into the kitchen and showed me something on her laptop. A map, overlaid with red. The red was spreading south and east like something spilled on a table. Delwood was still white. For now, Meg said. Shirley had been paying attention since Saturday. Not in the way Meg had been paying attention, not hospital bulletins and clinical spread models, but in the way that a 71-year-old woman who has lived in the same town her entire life pays attention, through the web of things people tell each other at the hardware store and the gas station and over the back fence. She sat us down at the kitchen table with coffee and eggs she'd started before we arrived because she'd known what time we'd be there even though we hadn't told her, and she talked while we ate. The Poletti farm 7 miles north, she said. Their son drove in from the city Friday, came alone. Didn't look right, that was the word people used apparently. Didn't look right. He'd been in his father's barn since Saturday and nobody had seen him come out, and nobody had gone in to check. The Lutheran church had opened its hall as a gathering point. Pastor Jean was there every day. People coming in to share what they'd heard, trying to get a picture of things from the pieces everyone carried in. The sheriff, a man named Dale Orish, who Shirley referred to as Dale Orish the way people say a name when they have complex feelings about it, had put up a post on the town's Facebook page saying everything was under control and people should stay calm and that he was monitoring the situation. He had not been seen in person since Sunday. The co-op owner, a woman named Paula Strike, had started letting people come in and buy feed and dry goods in bulk. No price gouging. She'd posted a handwritten sign on the door saying take what you need and we'll sort out the accounting later, which in Shirley's opinion was the most sensible thing anyone in town had done so far. Walt had been doing nighttime watch since Monday on his own initiative. He'd asked 2 other men on the street to take shifts with him and they'd seen 3 of them, in 4 nights, all passing through, none of them stopping, all of them moving wrong. I asked Shirley what wrong meant, specifically. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. Like the body doesn't know what it's for anymore, she said. Like something is running the legs but nobody told it why. She said this very plainly. The way she said most things, without drama, without needing to underline it. I thought about the figure in the stopped car on the highway. The slow rotation of the head toward a sound we couldn't hear. Yeah. I said. Yeah. Meg was looking at her mother with an expression I recognized from the rare occasions when she discovered she'd underestimated someone. A private recalibration. Mom. Meg said, how long have you been thinking about this? Since Wednesday. Shirley said, when the Poletti boy came in from the city. Meg put down her fork. Why didn't you tell me? Because. Shirley said, you would have driven here on Wednesday, and the roads were worse then than they are now. We slept 4 hours, which was not enough and was also the most I'd had since Sunday. When I woke up, Marcus was already in the kitchen with Shirley and they were playing cards, a game that involved a lot of Shirley explaining rules and Marcus saying that's not how you play this, and Shirley saying that's how we've always played this, and both of them being completely unbothered by the disagreement. Nora was on the porch with Biscuit and a picture book she'd found in the room where we used to stay. A kid's book that had been there since Meg was a child. Nora was too old for it by several years and was reading it with total absorption. I stood at the kitchen window with a second cup of coffee and looked at the back 40. Shirley's property line ran to a fence and beyond it was a neighboring field, Winterbear, flat to the tree line half a mile away. Walt Ferris came across the road around 10 and sat at the kitchen table, and the 4 of us, me, Meg, Shirley, Walt, had a conversation that felt like something that mattered and that I want to try to get right. The question was whether Delwood was a place to stay or a place to pass through. Walt's position was stay. He'd lived here his whole life, he knew every road and every person and every building, The town had a well system and a grain co-op and enough rural self-sufficiency that a small community that organized well could hold out for a long time. Meg's position was harder to read. She kept asking Walt questions instead of stating a view. How many people do you think are still here? How many of those have seen what's moving through? How many of those are going to keep their heads when it gets closer? Walt answered honestly, maybe 1,200 people left. Maybe a third of those had seen something or knew someone who had. And as for keeping their heads, people are scared, he said. Scared people do dumb things. But people here are also practical. They're not city people. They know how to be uncomfortable and keep working. I'd been thinking about the map Meg had shown me. The red spreading south and east. Delwood was east of the outbreak center, and south was where the worst reports were coming from, which meant we were sitting in a corridor. I said this out loud. Walt looked at me. I didn't say you were wrong to be concerned, he said. I said I know this place, that's what I'm offering. Knowing the place. If things come through here and we've organized, that's different than things coming through and we haven't. That's a real thing. I said, it's a real thing but it depends on how fast things come and how many. Walt didn't have an answer for that because nobody did. Meg finally said what she'd been thinking. She said it quietly like she'd been carrying it for a while. There's an island, she said. We all looked at her. Lake Carver, she said. It's 40 miles north. There's an island out there. Maybe 2 miles across, one boat dock. No road access. Her friend from nursing school, a woman named Beth, had a family property out there. A cabin. She'd mentioned it at Christmas as a joke. If things ever really went sideways, she'd said, the island's the place to be. Meg had texted Beth at 6 in the morning. Beth had texted back 3 words. Island is open. Walt looked at the table for a moment. That's not a bad idea, he said finally, which from Walt was something close to high praise. Meg looked at me. It was my decision and it wasn't my decision. It was the kind of thing where everyone in the room knows the right answer and is waiting for someone to say it out loud. We're going to the island, I said. This is the part that was hard. Because it wasn't just us. It was never just us once we were in Shirley's kitchen and Walt was across the table and the kids could hear everything through the thin walls of a house where nobody was pretending anymore. Walt had a truck, an old one, a diesel F-250 that he kept in better shape than most people kept vehicles half its age. He had fuel in it and more fuel in 2 cans in his shed. His position, stated plainly, was that he was going where Shirley went. He'd been looking after her since her husband died 4 years ago and he wasn't going to stop now because of a lake. He said this looking at the table and not at Shirley, which told you everything about what that sentence meant to him. Shirley received this information by refilling his coffee cup. Then there was Pastor Gene. Shirley called him, not to invite him, to let him know what was happening, and he came over within the hour. A tall thin man in his 50s with the kind of steady pastoral calm that either came from genuine faith or a very long practice of not showing distress in front of people who needed him not to, probably both. He had 7 people at the church hall who had nowhere to go, not his congregation necessarily. Just people who'd ended up there. A young woman named Dessa who'd been passing through town on her way back to college when her car died and she hadn't been able to get it running again. An older couple named the Brants who'd driven from 2 towns over when their neighborhood went wrong. A man named Terry who wouldn't give his last name and who'd been sleeping in the church parking lot in his sedan and who Pastor Gene said was frightened but not a problem. 2 others who I'll come to. Pastor Gene was not asking to come. He was asking what we thought he should tell the 7 people in his care. And the fact that he was asking at all instead of just deciding told me something about the weight he was carrying. Meg and I looked at each other across the kitchen. The truck and the F-250 together, loaded carefully, could carry 14 people if some of them were willing to ride uncomfortable. We have room, I said, if they can leave in 2 hours. Pastor Gene nodded. He went back to the church. Walt started loading his truck. Shirley went upstairs and came back down in 20 minutes with her bag packed. 1 bag, medium-sized. She'd been living in this house for 50 years and she packed for an island trip in 20 minutes with 1 bag. I asked her later how she'd decided what to take. She said, I took the things that don't exist anywhere else. Frank's watch, the kids' photos, my mother's recipe box. Everything else is just things. The 2 others at the church hall were a woman named Lynn and her daughter Cara. Kara was 7 years old, and Lynn had the hollow, exhausted look of a person who'd been holding it together for someone else's sake for so many days that the holding together had become the whole personality. She'd stopped being scared and started just being functional, which is a kind of survival, but it costs you. Kara had a stuffed rabbit and a very serious expression, and when Nora said hello to her, Kara said hello back and asked what Nora's dog's name was, and Nora said Biscuit, and Kara said that's a food name, not a dog name, and Nora said I know, I picked it. And just like that they were in the backyard running Biscuit around the fence line while the adults loaded trucks and made decisions. Kids, the speed at which they find the one thing that works. 14 people. 2 trucks, 40 miles north on county roads. It sounds manageable typed out like that. It was not entirely manageable. We split the group between the vehicles on rough logic. Shirley and Walt's people in the F-250 because Walt knew the roads, our family and the overflow in the crew cab and the bed. Dessa rode in the bed with Terry and the Brants. She'd offered before anyone asked her, and when I tried to tell her she didn't have to, she said, I'm 22 and I grew up camping. The old couple shouldn't be in the wind and neither should the pastor. I'll take the bed. She pulled her hood up and sat against the back of the cab, and that was the end of that conversation. Marcus went into the bed too. He didn't ask permission. He just climbed in and sat next to Dessa and the Brants and faced backward, watching the road behind us the way I'd asked him to watch the mirrors earlier. I saw it happen. I saw my son decide to be useful in a way that cost him comfort, and I didn't say anything about it. Just noted it and kept moving the way you keep moving when you don't have time to stop and feel the things you feel. The first 20 miles were clear. Walt led, I followed. We kept close enough to see each other, but not so close that a single obstacle would stop both trucks at once. Some road logic I'd worked out in my head during the drive the night before without really articulating it. The sky was overcast, a flat pale gray that made the fields look colorless, harvested corn stubble and bare soybean rows and the occasional stand of trees marking a property line or a creek. Meg had Beth's number and was in sporadic contact, texts going through when the signal cooperated. The messages were short. We're coming, 40 miles out, is the boat dock accessible? Beth's reply came through in pieces. Yes, dock is clear, radio signal on channel 16, we'll come to shore when we see you. A 2-mile crossing by boat. We'd cross that problem at the dock. At mile 23 Walt's truck brake lights came on. I stopped behind him. He got out and walked back to me. Something in his posture that was controlled in the way that tightens things rather than releasing them. Roads blocked ahead, he said, about a quarter mile. There's a vehicle stopped across both lanes, and there's movement around it. How many? He shook his head, enough that I didn't want to go through. I got out and walked up to where I could see around the bend. The vehicle was a delivery truck, brown, commercial, the kind that carries packages door to door. It was stopped diagonally across the road and the back doors were open and hanging and there were figures around it. I counted 7. They were not doing anything, not interacting with each other, not going anywhere, just present, the way objects are present in a space, taking up the area around the truck with the directionless occupation of things that have lost the concept of purpose. One of them was looking toward us, or looking toward where we were. Its head was up, oriented, but the looking wasn't right. It was a different kind of looking than being seen. I walked back to the trucks. We go around, I said. Walt had the same road in his head I did. There's a farm track about a half-mile back on the right. Runs east through the Detler property. It'll add 15 minutes and it gets rough, but it connects back to the county road north of here. Let's do it. We turned around, both trucks, a slow, careful 3-point turn on a narrow road, and we went back to the farm track and turned east onto it. The track was unpaved and February frozen, which helped the mud, but introduced a corrugated roughness that rattled the whole truck and sent everything in the bed sliding. I heard Dessa shout something from the bed that I chose to interpret as she was okay. The track went through a bare field and then through a stand of old oaks that closed overhead like a tunnel, and then emerged into another field, and then back to gravel and then asphalt, and we were north of the delivery truck and the things around it. Nobody in the bed was hurt. Dessa said, I've had worse turbulence on a Spirit flight. The Brant woman laughed. The first laugh from anyone in a while. Marcus didn't laugh. He was still facing backward, his eyes on the road behind us, his jaw set. I had to look away from the mirror because looking at him was too much. We got there with lights still in the sky. Barely. The sun behind the clouds dropping toward the western treeline and the lake coming into view as we crested a low hill, gray and wide and still. Lake Carver was bigger than I'd imagined from Meg's description. I'd pictured a pond with a cabin name. This was a real lake, 3 miles across maybe. Irregular shoreline with coves and points. The island visible from the hill as a dark mass of trees sitting in the middle of the water with a single light burning on it. Beth's light. Meg made a sound in the passenger seat that was not a word. The boat dock was at the end of a gravel access road, a proper dock, long and wooden with a covered storage shed at the shore end and a light on a pole that someone had left burning. We parked both trucks at the end of the access road, got everyone out, and stood at the edge of the dock looking at the island and the water between us and it. The lake was absolutely flat, no wind, the island's trees reflected in it like a second island pointing down. Meg got on her phone. No call, the signal was gone, but she could text. She sent Beth a message. We're at the dock. We waited. 3 minutes. 5. Kara had hold of Lynn's hand and was looking at the water with the serious expression she'd been wearing all day. Is it far? She asked. Not very. Lynn told her. Is there fish in it? Kara asked. Probably. Lynn said. Kara accepted this and watched the water. Then a sound, an outboard motor, small, distant, growing. A boat emerged from the island's shoreline, moving toward us across the flat gray water, getting larger, and in it 2 figures. Beth was at the motor. I recognized her from the one time I'd met her at a party years ago, a solid, capable-looking woman in her 40s in a barn coat and rubber boots, and next to her a man I didn't know, her husband David maybe, also in a barn coat. They came to the dock and Beth tied off and looked up at 14 people standing at the end of the dock. She didn't look surprised. She'd been expecting us. But maybe not all of us. Meg, she said. Beth. Meg said. They looked at each other the way that old friends look at each other when the circumstances are extreme enough that catching up can't happen the normal way. How's the island? Meg asked. Intact. Beth said, there's the cabin and 2 outbuildings, a generator, a hand pump on the well, food for. She paused. For a month. She looked at the group again. For 14. Let's see what we can do. We can do it. Shirley said from the back of the group. Beth looked at Shirley. Shirley extended her hand. I'm Margaret's mother. I brought a recipe box and practical intentions. Beth took her hand. That's exactly what we need. Walt said, boat's going to take multiple trips. Yeah. Beth said, 3, maybe 4. Who goes first? Kids and the older ones. I said. Then everyone else. Nobody argued. Kara went first with Lynn and Nora went with them, and Biscuit had to be lifted into the boat, because he'd decided at the last second that the water was suspicious and Marcus lifted him in without being asked, and Biscuit rowed across in Kara's lap looking deeply betrayed. While the boat made its first crossing, I stood at the dock with Walt and Pastor Jean and Terry, who wouldn't give his last name, and watched the island get closer for them and further for us. Terry said, do you think it'll hold? Walt said, it's an island. It'll hold. Terry said, I mean the situation. Do you think it'll hold? Do you think this is the kind of thing that passes? Walt was quiet for a moment. I think some things pass and some things change what passing means, he said. Terry looked at him. Walt looked at the water. Pastor Jean said, amen to that. Terry pulled his jacket tighter. For the first time I noticed he was shaking slightly, not from cold, from the sustained expenditure of holding fear inside a body that was tired of holding it. I put a hand on his shoulder. He didn't say anything, just nodded, but the shaking slowed a little. The boat came back across the flat, dark water, and we loaded the next group, and the lake held all of us one crossing at a time. Beth's Island had a name. Sallow Point. It was on maps but nobody called it that. Locals just called it the Marsh Island or sometimes just the island, the way places get named by the people who use them rather than the people who chart them. 2 miles of forest and shoreline and a clearing in the middle where the cabin sat. A proper cabin, not a weekend shack. 3 rooms, a loft, a porch that wrapped around 2 sides, a generator in a shed out back that Beth had been running on low since Monday to keep the chest freezer going. We got the last group across just as the dark finished settling. No moon that night. Just the dock light and the cabin windows throwing yellow onto the grass. 14 people in a 3-room cabin with a loft. It was tight in the way that a full truck had been tight. The kind of tight that you stop noticing after an hour because the alternative is standing in the cold. Beth and David had done what they could to prepare. Sleeping bags pulled from storage, the loft cleared out, a pot of something on the propane stove that smelled like onions and broth, and the specific comfort of hot food made by someone who was trying. Kara ate 2 bowls of it and fell asleep on a sleeping bag before Lynn could get her boots off. Nora fell asleep on the couch with biscuit on her feet and a blanket pulled up to her chin. Same position as in the truck. Same blanket actually. She'd carried it the whole way without anyone asking her to. Marcus sat at the kitchen table with David and asked questions about the generator. How much fuel? What does it run? Can it be stretched? David answered each one straight, no sugarcoating, and Marcus listened with the Atlas reading concentration he'd developed on the road. Shirley was already in the kitchen with Beth organizing the food stores. Inventorying, sorting, making a list on a piece of paper in her small precise handwriting. She had the recipe box open on the counter and was cross-referencing it with what was available which I didn't fully understand but which seemed to be producing results. Walt sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and watched the lake. I went out and sat with him. The lake was invisible in the dark. You could hear it, a small lapping at the dock pilings, but you couldn't see it. Just the darkness where the water was and the slightly different darkness where the trees were on the opposite shore and between them nothing. Safe here. Walt said, for now. I know. Question is how long for now lasts. I thought about Meg's map, the red spreading, the distances involved. Long enough to matter. I said. Walt sipped his coffee. You believe that? Yeah. I said. I believe that. He nodded, not like he was convinced, like he was filing the information. The door opened behind us and Meg came out and stood with her hand on my shoulder and looked at the lake. Kids are down, she said. Good. She sat on the porch rail, faced us both. David's radio is picking up intermittent signal from a station about 80 miles south, she said. They're saying the outbreak has a geographic center and it's moving, but it's moving in a direction. Which direction? Walt asked. West. Meg said. Walt and I looked at each other. West was away from us. West was away from the lake and the island and the 40 miles of county road we'd crossed. Neither of us said anything for a moment, because good news in a bad situation has a kind of fragility to it, like saying it out loud will knock it over. Then Walt said, well, that's something. Yeah. I said, that's something. The first 3 days were about organization. Beth and David had the structure of the place in their heads and the rest of us had to learn it. The generator ran 4 hours in the morning and 4 hours in the evening. Nothing else. Every other hour was lantern light and daylight and making do. The well pump was manual. A hand pump in the yard that took effort. Marcus and David worked out a rotation for water drawing. Marcus woke up early every morning and did the first pull of the day without being asked, and I never said anything about it because some things work better without comment. Food was the central math. 14 people. Beth's original stores plus what we'd brought in bags from Shirley's and the co-op. Pastor Jean had thought to throw bags of rice and dried beans into his car before leaving the church hall, and that rice and those beans may have been the most practically important thing any individual contributed to the whole operation. Shirley's recipe box turned out to contain 70 years of make-do cooking, Depression-era dishes, rural winter dishes, things that turned small amounts of protein and large amounts of starch into actual meals. She cooked every evening and people ate and nobody complained about what was on the plate because complaining about food on the island felt like a concept from a different civilization. Terry turned out to be a carpenter. His last name was Marsh, Terry Marsh. He'd been reluctant to give it because of some situation he'd been in before all this that he never fully explained and that none of us pushed on. What mattered was that he looked at the outbuildings and the dock and the cabin porch and within 48 hours had a list of repairs that needed doing and the tools from David's shed to do them. He worked from first light to last light every day. Quiet, methodical, occasionally calling Marcus over to hold something or hand him a tool. The Brants were in their 70s and couldn't contribute labor but contributed something else. Mr. Brandt had been a high school history teacher for 30 years and he had a way of framing things that made them less heavy. Not minimizing, contextualizing. He had dinner conversation that made people feel like they were part of something with a shape to it rather than just frightened people on an island waiting. Mrs. Brandt crocheted. She'd had yarn in her bag. She crocheted through every evening and it was meditative to watch, and 3 people asked her to teach them and she did. Dessa turned out to be studying environmental science. She knew things about the lake, the fish in it, the cattail stands at the island's north shore that were apparently edible if you knew what you were doing, which she did. She and Marcus spent an afternoon pulling cattail shoots and came back with enough to supplement dinner and looking unreasonably pleased with themselves. Lynn was mostly quiet. She did what was asked and cared for Kara and existed at the edges of things the way someone does when they're still processing and not quite ready to be part of a group. Nobody pushed her. Kara attached herself to Shirley by the second day and followed her around the kitchen, asking questions about everything. Shirley answered every question in full, no shortcuts, no talking down. Within a week Kara could make cornbread from scratch and was working on biscuits and had opinions about the right amount of salt in soup that she expressed without being asked. 9 years old, soaking up utility like it was something she'd always been waiting for someone to teach her. The radio became Meg's thing. David's shortwave, a battered handheld unit that he'd had for years as a backcountry hiking backup. It pulled signal in fragments, a sentence here, static, half a broadcast there. You had to be patient with it and willing to sit through a lot of nothing to get the something. Meg sat with it every evening after the generator came on and the signal strengthened. She kept a notebook and wrote down what she caught. Dates, locations mentioned, phrases that seemed to mean something when you put them together. The picture that assembled over 2 weeks was incomplete and sometimes contradictory, but its general shape was this. The outbreak had a center, and the center had been roughly located in a cluster of mid-sized cities along the eastern population corridor. It had moved fast in dense areas and slower in sparse ones. The military response had been real but staggered. The containment efforts that the press conferences had been describing as controlled were not controlled, not fully, but they weren't nothing either. The word on the radio that people kept using was corridor. They talked about corridors the way you talk about weather patterns. This area is in the corridor. This area is outside the corridor. The corridor is shifting. Delwood was outside the corridor. Lake Carver was outside the corridor. The island was not on any map that the corridor cared about. Meg told me this on the 8th night sitting on the porch with the radio in her lap and the notebook open on the rail. She said it the way she'd said most things since we left home. Precisely, without drama, just the information and its implications. We're in the right place, she said. Yeah. She looked at the notebook. I keep thinking about Mercy General, she said. The parking lot. I know. All those people. I know. She closed the notebook. She said, I'm glad you made us go that Tuesday. I made us. You made us, she said. I would have waited one more day. And I know what one more day looked like. I thought about the highway at midnight, the cars going east, the people in the truck bed facing the wind. I think you would have gone. I said. I just went first. She picked up my hand and looked at it like she was reading something. Then set it back down but held on to it. We sat with the radio between us and the lake invisible in the dark, and the cabin windows glowing behind us, and inside the sounds of people settling toward sleep. All of it delicate. All of it held together by proximity and shared purpose and the water between us and the mainland. But held. Day 11. Marcus came back from the North Shore with mud on his boots and a look on his face that I'd learned to read since the road. The look that means I saw something and I'm deciding how to tell you. He waited until the kids were occupied. Nora and Kara were in the yard with Biscuit, and the sound of them came through the window in bursts while Marcus sat across from me at the kitchen table. There's a boat, he said, on the North Shore, came in sometime last night. Pushed up into the cattails. What kind of boat? Aluminum flat bottom, small, the kind you fish from, no motor, oars in it. Anyone in it? No, he said, but. He put something on the table. A backpack, small, child-sized, bright red with a cartoon patch on the front pocket. There was a child's sneaker in the boat, he said, just one, and this on the bottom of the hull. My chest tightened. Was there anything else? He shook his head. Blood? I asked. He nodded once. I sat with that for a moment. Okay, I said. Dad. I know. What does it mean? It means someone was on the mainland trying to get to the island, and something went wrong, and we don't know what. I said. Could they be on the island? I don't think so. I said, but we're going to check. We're going to walk the full perimeter today, and we're going to tell Beth and David and Walt, and that's how we handle it. Quietly and carefully, and without scaring people we can't help right now. He nodded. He was doing the thing again. The navigator thing. The face that narrowed down to the problem and the hands that wanted to be useful. You did right coming to me first. I said. He picked up the backpack and turned it over in his hands. There's a name inside, he said, written in marker on the tag. Josie. We didn't say anything for a moment. Someone named Josie had been in a boat in the dark trying to get to an island she maybe couldn't see, and something had happened before she got there. I wanted to grieve that properly, and I couldn't yet. We walked the perimeter that afternoon, me, Walt, Marcus, Terry, slow, thorough, the full shoreline. We found nothing. No sign of anyone on the island who shouldn't be there. No sign of what had happened to Josie. Walt said, we put a light on the dock every night from now on, bright as we can make it. If there's anyone out there on the water trying to find this place, a light is how they find it. We did that. We ran a lamp on the dock every night on its own circuit off the generator. Nobody came. But the light was there. Day 16. Meg came inside from the porch and set the radio on the kitchen table without saying anything. She sat down. Everyone in the cabin felt the change in her. The way you feel weather through a closed window. One by one people stopped what they were doing. It's gone, she said. The station I've been tracking, the one 80 miles south. It's been running on a loop for 3 days. The same broadcast cycling on a timer. But this morning it didn't come back on. How long has it been off? David asked. She checked her watch. 4 hours. Walt said. Generators run out of fuel. Could be that. Meg said. She wasn't saying it like she believed it. The room was quiet in the specific way rooms get quiet when everyone is thinking the same thing and nobody wants to be the first to put it in the air. Pastor Jean said, what does it mean for us practically? Meg looked at her notebook. Practically. I've been using that station to triangulate our position relative to the corridor. Without it I'm working off fragments from 2 other signals that come and go. It's harder to tell. But the last reading I had. She opened the notebook. The corridor has slowed, she said. I don't know if that's good or bad. It could mean containment. It could mean it's run out of density to move through. It could mean something I'm not thinking of. But it's not moving west anymore at the rate it was. Lynn said from the corner where she'd been sitting quietly with Kara drawing beside her. Does it matter? People looked at her. I mean, she said, does it change what we do today? Do we get off the island because of this? She wasn't being dismissive. She was asking the actual question. No. I said. She nodded. Then let's have breakfast. She got up and went to the kitchen and started water for oatmeal. The most practical thing anyone had said all morning. Kara followed her. The room slowly reanimated. But Meg stayed at the table with her notebook and I stayed with her and we sat together looking at the last entries. The corridor positions, the dates, the fragments of other people's voices she'd assembled into something like a picture. Whatever that picture was showing us. We were still here. We were still on the right side of the water. That was enough for one morning. Day 18. Dessa had been fishing off the dock every morning since day 4. Improvised gear mostly. A hook and line from David's tackle box and patience she seemed to have in bottomless supply. She'd been catching enough to supplement. Perch mostly, the occasional bass, once a catfish that caused a significant debate about preparation methods that Shirley settled decisively. This morning she came back with the fish, but also with something else. A look. She set the fish on the porch railing and sat on the steps and Marcus sat next to her because he'd started doing that. Sitting near Dessa when she had something to say. Part admiration, part navigation, the boy trying to orient himself toward useful people the way a compass orients itself toward north. I went out when I saw her face. There were sounds this morning, she said, from the mainland. I've been hearing nothing for a week, no vehicles, no anything. This morning there was an engine, not one, several, and, she paused. And what? Voices, she said, calling. Calling what? She looked at the dock. Calling for help, I think. I couldn't make out words, just the shape of it. The way voices carry over water when someone is trying to reach something far away. I looked at the mainland shore, 1.5 miles of flat water away. You couldn't see anyone from here. The treeline was too dense and the morning haze was still sitting on the water. How long? 20 minutes maybe. Then it stopped. It stopped, or it got quiet. She thought about it. It got quiet, she said. I stood on the porch for a while looking at the water. The distance that had been our protection for 18 days looked different now that something on the other side of it had spoken. Walt came out and stood with me. We can't go over there, he said. I know. The dock light, he said. I know, Walt. If someone was trying to reach us. I know, I said. We stood there together with the morning haze on the water and the mainland in the distance and the voices that had reached across the lake and then gone silent. This was the hardest part of the island, not the crowding or the rationing or the physical labor of survival. The hardest part was the distance itself. The water that kept us safe also kept us from knowing what was happening on the other side of it, and the not knowing was its own particular weight. Marcus came and stood with us. The three of us on the porch looking at 1.5 miles of water. Nobody said anything. Sometimes that's what you do. You stand with people and look at the thing you can't fix and you let the looking be what it is. It was day 21 before Lynn talked about it. Evening, after dinner. The cabin doing that thing it did at the end of each day where the energy shifted from occupation to rest and people found their corners and the lantern light went warm and low. Kara was asleep in the loft. She slept early and hard every night the way children do when they've been genuinely physically spent by the day. Lynn was sitting at the table with a cup of tea and Shirley was across from her doing nothing in particular. Just being there the way Shirley was very good at being there. And Lynn started talking. She'd been in a suburb 40 miles east of our home city. She said this and I did the geography in my head and the geography was bad. 40 miles east was directly in the corridor. Her husband had been at work when it started, a Tuesday. She'd been home with Kara. It had moved through their neighborhood in under 4 hours. She described it the way people describe things they've been carrying alone for too long. In bursts, without much order, the details coming up not in sequence but in the order they'd been sitting in her. She'd gotten Kara out on foot. No car. The car was in the garage and the garage door opener had stopped working and she couldn't lift the door manually because there was something against it on the other side that she didn't look at directly. On foot, 5 miles to her sister's house. The sister wasn't there. The house was open and she'd taken her sister's car from the driveway and driven west. She didn't know where her husband was. She'd stopped being able to think about her husband because thinking about her husband was the thing that would have stopped her moving and she couldn't stop moving because of Kara. So she'd stopped thinking about him and driven west and ended up in Delwood when the car ran low on fuel and she couldn't find a working pump and she'd found the church. That was it. That was the whole story. 40 miles east and 5 miles on foot and a garage door she didn't look at directly and then nothing. Shirley reached across the table and put her hand over Lynn's hand. Lynn looked at the hand. She said, I don't know if he. Shirley said, I know. Lynn said, I keep thinking I should feel more. Shirley said, you feel what you can when you can. The rest waits. Lynn looked at Kara's backpack propped against the wall. The yellow one with the unicorn patch. Kara had packed it herself when they left. Lynn didn't know what was in it and hadn't opened it because it was Kara's. She said, she packed her own bag, 7 years old, and she packed her books and her rabbit and a juice box. She packed a juice box. Shirley said, smart girl. Yeah. Lynn said, yeah she is. The lantern light held them both. The table between them and the hands on top of it and the window behind them showing nothing but dark. I was on the other side of the room and I felt like I was witnessing something too private to watch and couldn't look away from it either. After a while Lynn picked up her tea and Shirley picked up hers and they sat together in the particular silence that comes after someone has put something down that they've been carrying too long. The island held all of us that night. All of our carried things. All of our not yet processed losses. It held them the way water holds things, not solving them, just giving them somewhere to be. The food math was changing. Beth sat down with Shirley and Meg on day 24 and they did it honestly on paper, and the honest number was 6 weeks at current rationing. Which sounded like a lot until you started thinking about what 6 weeks meant without resupply. David had taken the boat to the mainland twice for scouting. Short trips, never far from shore. He'd come back with what he could carry from an empty farmhouse and a feed store whose door had been open. Rice, canned goods, a case of motor oil that nobody needed but that he grabbed anyway because the instinct to take things in supply situations is hard to override. Both times he'd gone alone. Beth hadn't tried to stop him and nobody else had offered. The radio had picked up a new signal on day 23. Weak, intermittent, but real. A voice reading coordinates and status updates in the flat cadence of official communication. Military maybe, or some emergency management structure that was still functioning somewhere. Meg had spent 2 days decoding the fragments. The picture she assembled was this. There were organized settlements, not many, not everywhere, but present, pockets of functioning structure in rural areas away from the population corridors, some military adjacent, some civilian organized, and they were beginning to network, beginning to reach out to each other over radio frequencies that anyone with the right equipment could find. Beth had the right equipment. We can reach them. Meg said, I think I have enough of the frequency pattern to send. It might take time for someone to respond, but do it. I said. She sent a message that night. Our location, our numbers, our status. Nothing more. Kept it short the way you keep things short when you don't know who's listening. We waited. Day 24 nothing. Day 25 nothing. Day 26 at 7 in the morning the radio crackled and a voice came back. Sallow Point. We copy. This is a civilian coordination network. How many in your group? What is your supply status? Can you sustain for 30 days? Meg looked at me across the kitchen. Everyone in the cabin was awake and still. She keyed the radio. 14 people, she said, 6 weeks of food, more with supplement. Yes, we can sustain. Who are we talking to? Static. Then. My name is Colonel Reeves, retired. I'm coordinating resupply and movement for isolated groups in your region. We have a land route established to a settlement point 40 miles north of your position. It's functioning, it's defended, and there's room. But we're asking groups to make the choice themselves. We don't compel movement. We can get a boat to your position in 4 days. Same boat back if your group decides to move. Your call. Meg held the radio and looked at the room. 14 people looking back at her. Walt said, Island's been good to us. Pastor Jean said, there are people on the mainland who need what we've built here. Dessa said, I've been thinking about going back to something, not just staying in something. Terry Marsh said nothing but he was looking at the door. Lynn looked at Kara. Kara looked up from the drawing she'd been doing. Where would we go? She asked. Somewhere with more people. Lynn said. Kara thought about it. Is there a school? Nobody knew. Probably. Lynn said. Kara went back to her drawing. Okay then. Marcus was looking at me. I looked at Meg. She was already looking at me. The way she'd looked at me in the kitchen at home when I set the second box down on the floor, and she understood what it meant. She keyed the radio. We'll be ready, she said. The night before the boat came. We did what people do when something is ending. We stayed up later than we should have and we talked about things that weren't the situation. Shirley's stories about Frank. David's years working out of doors guides in his 20s. Mr. Brandt's story about the worst class he ever taught, 32 ninth graders and a broken projector and a film about the water cycle that nobody watched. Terry Marsh told us his real story finally. Nothing dramatic, just a thing he'd been embarrassed about. A small debt and a smaller altercation and a warrant that he'd been running from and that he understood was probably not a functioning concern anymore given the state of the world, but that had made him skittish about giving his name to strangers. The room received this without comment because what was there to say? Dessa and Marcus sat on the porch and I didn't listen to what they talked about, but the sound of it came through the window in low steady waves. 2 young people making sense of things. Nora and Kara sat in the loft, and I could hear Kara reading to Nora from one of the books Nora had brought, and Nora correcting her pronunciation gently, and Kara not minding. Lynn sat by the docklight on her own for a while. When she came back inside her face was different, not resolved. Nothing was resolved, but the set of it had changed. The specific exhaustion of carrying something alone had shifted slightly, not gone but redistributed, shared with the island, with the water, with the dark. I went outside around midnight and sat on the dock with my feet over the edge and looked at the water. The mainland was invisible, just dark and the faint sound of wind in the far trees. 26 days since we left home. I thought about the truck in the driveway that Tuesday night, the cooler in the bed, Marcus watching the mirrors, Nora with her blanket and her juice box, Meg with her hand on the dash, the Kellerman's light in the upstairs window, the hospital parking lot, the figure in the stopped car on the highway that turned its head toward a sound we couldn't hear. All of it in a line leading here, a dock on an island on a lake in the dark. I thought about the backpack we'd found, Josie written in marker on the tag, the dock light we'd run every night after. Nobody had come, but we'd left the light on. Meg came and sat beside me. She didn't say anything for a while. We just sat with our feet over the water and the dark pressing in from every side and the cabin lit behind us. Then she said, "I keep thinking about the drive." "Which part?" "All of it," she said, the way Marcus watched the mirrors, the way Nora just held on to the blanket, the way we got from one thing to the next without knowing there was a next. We didn't know there was a next. I said, "No." She said, "But we went anyway." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and I thought about how that was the whole answer to everything. Not knowing and going anyway. Not because you're brave or certain but because the people beside you are the reason moving is possible at all. We sat there until the cold got too much. Then we went inside to be with our people. The boat came on schedule. A proper one. A flat-bottomed aluminum workboat with a real motor and 2 men in it who introduced themselves as volunteers from the Settlement Coordination Network and who seemed, critically, to be exactly what they said they were. They helped us load. The process of leaving the island felt slower than the process of arriving at it. Arriving had been urgent, propulsive, the forward motion of escape. Leaving was something else, more deliberate, the way you close up a place that has been something to you. Beth and David were staying. This was their place and they would anchor it for whoever came next. They had the radio frequency now and the coordination network and people knew they were there. Beth stood on the dock while we loaded. Shirley hugged her and Beth hugged back hard. I shook David's hand and he held it for a moment and said, "You built something good here." I had a feeling he didn't mean the island. Walt helped the Brants into the boat and then climbed in himself and sat at the bow the way Pete had sat at the bow of the boat at the reservoir in the story I wasn't in but that felt like it ran parallel to ours somehow. All of us moving in different directions through the same broken world. Dessa was last off the dock beside me. She stood and looked at the island, the cabin, the tree line, the cleared yard where we'd worked and eaten and made the small daily negotiations of being a group. "I might come back here someday," she said. "Yeah. When it's different," she said. "Yeah." I said. We got in the boat. The motor started, we pulled away from the dock, and the island got smaller behind us the way all left things get smaller, not disappearing exactly, just receding to the size that memory keeps things. The mainland came up fast. A concrete ramp, a gravel road, 2 vehicles waiting for us, and beyond them a road heading north toward something that called itself a settlement and that none of us had seen yet. 14 people on a concrete boat ramp in the morning light. Blinking. Adjusting. Alive. Nora said. "Biscuit doesn't like the boat." Biscuit was on the ramp, already shaking water off his feet, and looking at the trees with his whole body rigid at the smells. "No," I said. "He really doesn't." She crouched down and scratched his ears and he forgot about the boat entirely. Marcus had the road atlas in his jacket. He'd been carrying it since we left home. Since before the truck, since before the island. He pulled it out now and opened it to the page that covered this region. He found our position, or close to it. He found the approximate location of the settlement. He traced the road between them with his finger. 40 miles, he said. Yeah. He looked up. "We can do 40 miles, he said. I looked at my son, at the person he'd been becoming in the 26 days since we left a house with a porch light on a timer and a slow leak in the rear tire and a dog that barked at everything. "Yeah," I said. "We can do 40 miles. Walt was already talking to the volunteers about the road conditions. Shirley was handing Kara a granola bar from her bag. Lynn was standing with her face turned up to the morning sun with her eyes closed and a stillness on her face that was new and fragile and real. Pastor Jean was saying something quiet that might have been a prayer, or might have been him just talking to himself the way people do when they've come through something. Terry Marsh was watching the tree line with old habits that the new world had given him a legitimate use for. Dessa had her notebook out. She'd been keeping her own record, it turned out. Her own version of Meg's map and observations. She'd been writing things down since day 3 on the island, and she was writing now, standing on a concrete boat ramp on the edge of whatever came next. I stood and watched them all. My family, and the people who had become around my family, over 26 days and 400 miles and 1 island, and a radio signal from somewhere north that had said there is a place, and there is room. Meg came and stood next to me. She didn't say anything. She took my hand. The volunteers said they were ready when we were. I looked at the road north. Then I looked back at the lake one more time. At the island, visible from here, a dark line of trees in the middle of the gray water. At the dock we'd left and the light on the pole that was still running, still burning over the water in the morning. Still on for Josie or whoever else came after us needing something to aim for in the dark. I turned back to the road. We were ready. 40 miles sounds like nothing after what we'd done. Not after 400 miles in a truck and a boat crossing and 26 days on an island. 40 miles felt like a walk to the corner store. But the road north was different from the roads we'd driven south on, quieter in a way that had shifted from ominous to something harder to name. The absence of the things that had frightened us on the highway that first night felt less like threat now and more like aftermath. Not the storm itself but the silence after it. When the air has changed and the damage is visible and the first birds start coming back to the branches. We rode in the volunteers' 2 trucks. Comfortable, fueled, driven by people who knew the roads and the checkpoints and which signs meant stop versus which meant keep going. Marcus sat up front with the driver of the first truck and asked questions the whole 40 miles. Road conditions, what's the settlement like, how many people, what's the organizational structure, how do you handle resupply, who's in charge and how did they get that way? The driver, a quiet man named Ortega who had the patient demeanor of someone who'd answered these questions many times before, answered everything straight. Marcus took mental notes the way he'd taken navigational notes from the atlas. Absorbing, cataloging, building a picture. Nora sat between me and Meg in the back seat with Biscuit on her lap. She'd stopped asking how far a long time ago. She just watched the road the way experienced travelers watch roads, not looking for the destination but looking at the country itself. The bare fields, the bare trees, the cold sky that was starting to break apart in the northwest with actual blue showing through. Shirley sat next to Diane Brandt and they were having a conversation about tomatoes, specifically about which varieties did best in different soils. I don't know how they got there but they were deep in it and both of them had opinions. Walt sat in the second truck and I could see him through the rear window of our vehicle. He was watching the road ahead from the passenger seat the way he'd watched the lake from Shirley's porch the night we arrived. Not with anxiety exactly, with attention, the attention of a man who understood that knowing your ground was a form of protection. The settlement appeared first as smoke. Thin columns of it rising from behind a tree line. With smoke, the good kind, the kind that means controlled fires and cook stoves and people doing the deliberate work of staying warm. Not the chemical flat smell that had been in the air the night we left home. Then the tree line broke and the road opened into a wide shallow valley, and we saw it. It was bigger than I'd expected. Not a camp, not a cluster of tents and tarps like the marina had been. Something more permanent than that, a collection of existing buildings, a farm town really, built around what must have been a grain processing facility at its center. The large corrugated steel buildings of it visible above the rooftops, and around it houses and outbuildings and a church steeple and the specific low skyline of a small American town that had been here a long time. Except now there was a perimeter. Not walls exactly, more like a defined boundary, a fence line reinforced with vehicles and repurposed materials, not ugly, not desperate looking, just clear. This is the edge and we know where the edge is. People were visible on it, walking the line, not military, not uniformed, just people in regular clothes doing a job. Ortega said, "That's the Mill Haven perimeter. We've had it up for 3 weeks. It's not designed to hold forever. It's designed to make the inside legible. so people know what's in and what's out. That's a good way to think about it, I said. Colonel Reeves's idea. Ortega said, the man thinks in terms of what people need to feel, not just what they need to have. We drove to a gate, a proper one with 2 people staffing it and a process, not intimidating, methodical, names, group composition, how you'd heard about Millhaven, any medical concerns, any supplies you were bringing in. The woman processing us was maybe 30, efficient, hair pulled back, a clipboard and a radio on her hip. She went down our group of 14 with the focused calm of someone who'd done this enough to have a rhythm. When she got to Terry, she asked his name and he said Terry Marsh, and she wrote it down without hesitation and moved on. Terry let out a breath that I heard from 2 people away. Inside the gate the road was gravel and on both sides of it there were people, not crowds, just ordinary human activity, a man splitting wood beside a house, a woman hanging something on a line. 2 teenagers walking together in that self-conscious way teenagers walk when they're aware of being visible. A child running after a dog with the pure velocity of someone who has nowhere specific to be. Nora said, Dad, that dog looks like Biscuit. It sort of did, a medium-sized brown and white mutt with ears that didn't agree with each other. It stopped running and looked at our truck as we passed, and Biscuit pressed his nose to the window with urgent interest. Yeah, I said, it kind of does. Colonel Reeves was not what I'd expected from a voice on a radio that said Colonel. He was 60-something, compact, wearing a flannel shirt over a thermal and work pants and the kind of worn leather boots that had been resold at least twice. He met us at what had been the town's feed and supply store and was now the coordination center. You could tell by the maps. There were maps everywhere. Not neat military maps, hand-drawn ones, printed ones, road atlases opened and taped to the walls with routes marked in different colors, handwritten notes at the margins, pins with string between them. The whole room a diagram of the region assembled from whatever information had come in by radio and messenger and the accounts of people arriving at the gate. He shook hands with each adult in our group. Steady grip, direct eye contact, not performing authority, just carrying it. When he got to Meg he held the handshake a beat longer. You were on the radio, he said. Yes. Good reads, he said. Your corridor analysis matched ours. We've been tracking the same shift. Meg said, where is it now? He turned to the largest map on the wall, walked to it, put his finger on a region 300 miles west of where we were standing. Stalled, he said, we don't fully understand why. It may be density depletion. It may be terrain. It may be something the biology is doing that we haven't figured out yet. But for 12 days it hasn't moved east. 12 days. Meg said. He looked at her. I know what you're thinking. 12 days isn't a pattern. It's a pause. She nodded. But a pause is something. He said. Yes, she said. A pause is something. He showed us around, not a tour exactly, more like an orientation. Here is where food is distributed. Here is the medical station which is run by a former ER physician named Garvey who according to Reeves is the most competent and most difficult person in the settlement. Here is the work assignment board where people sign up for what they can do. Here is the evening meeting where information is shared and decisions that affect the whole group are made communally. He stopped at the work board. We list what people know how to do, not what they think they should do. He said, a nurse practitioner is more valuable to us than 10 people who want to be on the perimeter watch. No offense to perimeter watch. He looked at Meg when he said nurse practitioner. None taken, she said. He looked at the group again. Taking stock. What else do we have? Electrical. I said. Commercial. He wrote it down. Carpenter. Terry said. Environmental science. Dessa said. Navigation. Marcus said, and then looked slightly embarrassed, like maybe that wasn't a real answer. Reeves looked at him without the embarrassment. How old? 14. He wrote it down seriously. We use everyone, he said. Marcus stood a little straighter. Reeves looked at Shirley. I cook, she said, and I manage people. I raised 4 children and ran a church fundraising committee for 22 years and those are the same skill. He almost smiled. What's your name? Shirley. Shirley. He wrote it down. I'm going to introduce you to a woman named Paula who is running our food operation and who needs exactly what you're describing. Shirley said, does she take direction? Reeves said, she gives it. good," Shirley said. "I prefer that. They gave us 2 houses. Adjacent ones on a quiet street 2 blocks from the coordination center. Modest, heated by wood stoves that had been installed in the living rooms, functional, clean, the previous occupants either gone before Millhaven organized or absorbed into the settlement elsewhere. Our family took the one on the left. Shirley and Walt took rooms in the same house because the idea of them being a separate address felt wrong to everyone including them. Pastor Jean and the Brants took rooms in the house on the right along with Lynn and Cara. Dessa and Terry took the 2 remaining rooms between them. The first night I stood in the kitchen of a house that wasn't mine and looked at the wood stove and thought about our kitchen at home. The one I'd stood in at 2 in the morning with all the lights off because I'd started feeling like lit windows were a bad idea. This kitchen had lit windows. That meant something. Meg came in from checking on the kids and leaned against the counter and crossed her arms and looked at me. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "You." She looked around the kitchen, at the wood stove and the unfamiliar cabinets and the window with the curtain someone else had hung. "I keep expecting to recognize things," she said, and then not recognizing them. "Yeah. It's disorienting," she said. "Not bad. Just." "I know." She uncrossed her arms and came and stood next to me, and we looked at the stove together. The stove was going. Someone had started it before we arrived. The warmth of it spread into the room in steady, even waves. Nora appeared in the doorway in her pajamas. "There's a cat," she said. "What?" "In the bedroom," she said. "A cat. Just sitting on the bed, like it lives here." "Maybe it does," I said. She disappeared back down the hallway. Meg and I looked at each other. "A cat," she said. "A cat," I said. She started laughing. A real one. The surprised kind that comes from somewhere below the place where you decide to laugh. And I started laughing too, and we stood in a stranger's kitchen laughing about a cat while the wood stove put out its steady heat. We could hear Marcus in the other room talking to someone through the wall. The house next door. His voice and then another voice, young, a kid he'd already found or who had already found him. The specific social velocity of teenagers that adults lose and never fully recover. Nora called from the bedroom. "I'm naming her Butter." "You can't name someone else's cat." Meg called back. "She doesn't have a tag." Nora called. Meg looked at me. "She's got a point," I said. The evening meetings at Millhaven happened in the old Lutheran church on the main street. Not religious meetings, organizational ones. Reeves had chosen the space because it was the largest indoor gathering place and because, he said, people behaved better in rooms with high ceilings. I didn't know if that was true, but I didn't argue with the results. We'd been at Millhaven for 4 days when I first went to one. Meg had been going since the second day because Garvey, the difficult ER physician, had pulled her into the medical structure immediately, and the evening meetings were part of how that structure coordinated. I went on the 4th night because Reeves had asked me to look at the electrical situation in 3 of the settlement's key buildings, and I had a report to give. The church was full. Not packed but full. 120 people maybe. Filling the pews and the chairs that had been added at the sides and standing along the back wall. The range of people was the thing that struck me first. Not demographics exactly, the full spectrum of whoever had ended up here. Old and young, families and singles, people who looked like they'd been put together carefully, and people who looked like they'd been through exactly what we'd been through. A woman in a business suit with mud on the hem sitting next to a man in coveralls. A teenager with both sleeves of tattoos doing something on a notebook next to an elderly couple holding hands. All of them here because the roads had pointed here, or because a radio signal had reached them, or because someone had told someone who had told someone. Reeves ran the meeting the way he did most things, efficiently and without theater. Updates on the perimeter, updates on the food situation, updates on the radio network and what was coming in from other settlements, questions from the floor that he answered or directed to whoever could answer them better. When he got to the electrical report, he called my name. I stood up in a church full of strangers and gave a 5-minute summary of what I'd found and what it would take to fix it and what the priority order should be. People listened. Not politely. Actually, the way people listen when the information matters to them directly. When I was done, a woman 3 rows back asked a specific technical question about load capacity, and I answered it, and she nodded and wrote something down. Reeves said, Cutler's going to need people who can run wire and follow direction. If you have relevant experience, see him after. 4 people found me after the meeting. One of them was a retired electrician named Howard, who had 30 years on me, and who I immediately understood I would be learning from rather than directing, and who seemed to understand the same thing without either of us having to say it. We shook hands. We started the next morning. Day 30. I found Marcus at the kitchen table after dinner with the atlas open in front of him. Not navigating, just looking. He had it open to the page that covered our home region. The county roads we'd taken south that first night, the state highway, the truck stop where the man had told me about the pileup, the back roads we'd used to get around Maddox. His pencil was in his hand, but he wasn't marking anything. Just looking. I sat across from him. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "I've been trying to figure out exactly where we stopped that first night. The gas station. Do you remember which exit?" I thought about it. 43, I think. Maybe 44. He found it on the map. Put a small mark there. He had marks all the way down to the lake. The whole route. Every stop, every detour, every place something had happened. The line of it ran south across 3 pages of the atlas. A record of 4 days in a truck and a boat and a borrowed vehicle, all the way to the lake and then back north to where we were now. "You've been mapping it," I said. He shrugged. "I just wanted to remember it right, before I forgot the details." I looked at the marks, the small pencil ticks and notations in his handwriting. The gas station at 43, the detour around the town, the rest stop, the bridge, the marina. "You're not going to forget it," I said. He looked at the map. "I know," he said, "but I wanted it to exist somewhere outside my head too." He paused. "Does that make sense?" "Yeah," I said. "It makes complete sense." He looked at the line of marks running south. "Dad," he said. "Yeah. Do you think the house is still there? Our house?" I thought about the kitchen I'd stood in with the lights off, the porch light on the timer, the Kellerman's light in the upstairs window. "I think the house is there," I said. "What's in it and around it I don't know. But the building." He nodded. "Do you want to go back someday?" I looked at the atlas, at the line running south to where we'd come from. "Someday," I said. "When someday means something again." He closed the atlas, set the pencil on top of it. He said, "I keep thinking about the people on the roads, the ones who didn't make it to wherever they were going, the ones in the stopped cars." "Me too," he said. "I feel like I should, I don't know, remember them or something. Is that weird?" "No," I said. "That's not weird at all." He looked at the atlas cover. "I don't know their names," he said. "You don't have to know their names." I said, "You can carry someone without knowing their name." He thought about that. Then he put the atlas in his jacket, the same place he'd carried it since we left home, and he went upstairs. I sat at the table alone for a while. Outside, through the window, Millhaven was doing what it did in the evening. The smell of cook fires and wood smoke, the sound of voices carrying down the street, someone's dog barking twice and going quiet. Somewhere across the settlement, Shirley was in a kitchen with Paula, organizing tomorrow's food distribution. Meg was in the medical station writing up the day's cases with the difficult, precise attention she brought to everything that mattered. Walt was probably on a perimeter shift because Walt had asked for a perimeter shift on day 2 and had been on one every night since. Dessa had sent a message through the radio network to her family. No response yet. She was waiting with the particular patience of someone who has run out of alternatives to patience. Lynn had signed Kara up for the settlement's children's learning group, and Kara had come home from the first session talking about a boy named Felix who knew everything about dinosaurs and was wrong about several things, and she had corrected him, and they were now apparently friends. Terry Marsh was 2 streets over in a house he'd been assigned to repair. Probably still working, probably by lantern light. The man didn't stop until the stopping was unavoidable. Pastor Jean had started holding evening prayers in the coordination center for whoever wanted them. Not many people so far, but not nobody either. 14 people who had been strangers and then been together and were now becoming something harder to name. Not family exactly, not quite community yet. The thing between those 2 words that doesn't have its own word. Nora appeared in the doorway in her pajamas with the cat draped over her arm like a fur stole. Butter says good night, she said. Tell Butter good night. I said. Nora relayed this to the cat with complete seriousness. The cat blinked. Nora went back upstairs. I sat at the table another minute. Then I got up and went to the window and looked out at the lit street and the smoke rising from the chimneys and the dark at the edge of the settlement's perimeter where Walt and the others walked the line. The dark was still there. It hadn't gone anywhere. It was the same dark it had been on the highway that first night and on the county roads and at the dock on the island. But on this side of the perimeter there were lights. And the lights were ours. And we had put them there. I went upstairs to find my family.